bringing attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Good evening, everyone. This is Andy Steele, your host. Thank you again for tuning in. Tonight my guests are Ted Walter and Dennis McMahon. They are with the High Rise Safety Initiative, and they'll be talking about the latest developments in that push to have the city of New York launch an investigation into all future high-rise building collapses, including the destruction of Building 7 on September 11th. In the first couple of minutes today, though, I want to go over this article up at ae911truth.org. It is the latest in Fran Shure's series titled, Why Do Good People Become Silent or Worse About 9/11? And I've been covering this off and on as the series has been put out. It comes out on a monthly basis, I believe, at the website. This one is part 9. It's called Brain Research. Part 2, Moral Psychology, and I found this really interesting. I find the whole subject of psychology and how people think and interact with each other fascinating just on its own, forgetting about 9/11 for just a moment. Everything that happens that humans do in our world is a result of thought. It all starts as a thought in people's brains. So, of course, to understand how those thoughts are formed and serve as the spark that creates action, you have to understand how people think generally. So I'm going to be reading this article and going over it with you. The article starts off saying, how do we acquire our values and our morals? Through reasoning, through emotion, or both? Do conservatives and liberals differ in their values? Does morality vary across cultures? Does our neurology affect our morality? These are the types of questions that moral psychologists and neurologists are trying to answer, and recently, research in moral psychology has increased voluminously. It's a hot topic. A few scholars in the humanities and sciences drafted a list of points on morality research upon which they could all agree. Among their points of consensus was that human morality is both innate and culturally derived. The innate building blocks of human morality are the products of evolution, with natural selection playing a critical role. A question that 9/11 activists often ask is, why don't more people become active in our movement, or at least support us, when they clearly understand that 9/11 was a staged event? Why do they instead become silent? Many conclude from the evidence and from the implications of that evidence that elements within our government had to be involved in this mass murder. They know that, in the aftermath of 9/11, hundreds of thousands of our fellow human beings have been murdered, nations have been ruined, and civil liberties have been gutted, and they are aware that, to this day, these atrocities continue. And I know, just stepping away from the article for a moment, this is a question that I've asked a lot throughout my career as a 9/11 Truth activist, is why are people so apathetic to this? Why are people just apathetic to the evidence that it was a controlled demolition? Forgetting the whole false flag question and nature of many people's accusations regarding 9/11, because AE 9/11 Truth itself just gets into the science of the building destructions and proving that those buildings were brought down in a controlled demolition. If you really care about the people that died on 9/11, if you really want to get whoever it is you think was responsible, whether you think it's members of our own government or whether you think it's the terrorists that we were told brought them down, why do you ignore this very key part of the event, the destruction of the buildings? What really caused them? What could have only caused those buildings to come down, which is pre-planted explosives? Why aren't people more passionate about understanding this and at least getting a real investigation into that matter? Now, going back to the article, it says, what keeps people from doing the right thing? What keeps our independent journalists from doing the right thing? What keeps our congressional representatives from doing the right thing? These representatives surely know the implications of the 9/11 evidence, but they are more silent and worse than most citizens of our country. This is a moral issue. I challenge moral psychologists to grapple with this issue instead of joining the conspicuous silence. George Lakoff has looked at the research in moral psychology. In his book, The Political Mind, he summarizes some of the findings that give us some insight into the profound silence of those who have at least accepted the 9/11 evidence and its implications, but who choose to keep quiet. Lakoff theorizes that our brains are wired to direct us towards well-being. Well-being is tied to right behavior, which is guided by our moral convictions, many of which are built into the human nervous system. For example, research into mirror neurons shows that we are hardwired for empathy and cooperation. A mirror neuron is a type of brain cell that responds in the same way when we observe a specific action by another as it does when we are performing that very same action ourselves. This discovery by neuroscientists helps to explain our human capacity for empathy. Then it goes on, the mirror neuron mechanism translates into the moral value common to many religions. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In Judaism, for example, mitzvah means a commandment to do good. And in everyday speech, mitzvah has come to mean a simple act of human kindness. But why is mitzvah a commandment? From the view of brain research, says Lakoff, this commandment and others similar to it manifest from our neural wiring. We feel good when we are kind to others. From this mirror neuron point of view, when we see others happy, we become happy. So the first question I ask myself, stepping away from the article, is, okay, if we're hardwired to be empathetic to others, if we're hardwired to want to be happy and see others happy, then how are we not empathizing with the people that died on September 11th? How are we not empathizing with the innocent people who have died in the wars that followed 9/11? All right, how are we not empathizing with the families who lost loved ones? Why is our empathy falling on the side of the state, which is not even a person, it's just a conglomeration of people, it's an institution, rather than the individuals who lost their lives that day and wanting to have full justice for them, and again, simply investigating the destruction of the buildings just to rule out any possibility that there was more to it. That's what I don't understand. Now, moving on, the innate structure can make it difficult for 9/11 skeptics to present the evidence showing that we have not been told the truth about 9/11, because virtually no one is going to feel happy upon hearing this information. If we are psychologically healthy, we do not want to cause distress in others. Nevertheless, a higher moral calling drives activists in the 9/11 truth movement forward so that they courageously transcend their inner taboo barriers and intrepidly present their evidence. There is too much at risk, they believe, to not do so. And that is the answer to the questions that I just asked, is most people don't want to rock the boat. Most people don't want to make awkward moments. Most people don't want to bring up the fact that the government's story is all wrong when it comes up in polite chit-chat with others, because most people are operating from a different set of math. They're operating from the idea that it was the Muslims driving the airplanes into the buildings that caused those buildings to fall, and because it hasn't been introduced in their minds yet by their propaganda boxes in their living rooms that there could be more to it, the idea seems outrageous to them. It makes them uncomfortable when you even bring up the thought or when you prove it by going over the evidence with them. Article continues, Lakoff theorizes that moral convictions are hardwired into our brains. If he is correct, we can easily see how these innate convictions help explain why good people become silent or worse about 9/11. Hardwired convictions that are especially relevant to the subject at hand include the following. We will be better off if, 1, as children we obey our parents than if we disobey. 2, we are with our community rather than opposed to it. And 3, we do not challenge those who have more power than we have. Since we commonly understand governing institutions in family terms, that is, we see authority figures as parental figures, then if we are to feel good, our hardwiring leads us to obey and believe our governing institutions. Given our hardwiring, we are also predisposed to be in conformity with our community's beliefs. And it's really funny because this reminds me of a discussion I had with somebody today just talking about success in general. What constitutes real success? And we got talking about school and how we look at successful students as being the kid who gets straight A's, who gets on the honor roll, who does the extracurricular stuff, who gets awards at the end of the year from the principal's award, whatever they are in that school. We see them as the successful students, the people who have studied hard, who have worked within the confines of the system that they were dropped into, that they had nothing to do with creating. All right, they kept up with it. They perform by the standards that others set for them. But what about the kid who doesn't do his homework? What about the kid who just kind of gets by, the kid who stays quiet, the kid who doesn't do all that extracurricular stuff, but maybe he goes home and he reads a book on iguanas because it's interesting to him and he knows a lot about iguanas, more than most adults would? What about the kid who goes home and writes an entire graphic novel by himself, draws the pictures, does a very good job of it for a kid, and ends up growing up into a teenager that makes even better pictures? So maybe he's not doing very great in school and memorizing mathematics or science and these topics that he is not going to really pursue in adulthood, but he's a success in something else. What about the people who don't want to work within the school system, people who just want to learn on their own based off of whatever path their mind goes down the direction of? What about those people? Are they not a success? I mean, to be a success, do you have to work within the confines of the system that was built up around you, or is it successful to not need the rewards of that system, to transcend it, to set your own standards, to be your own man? Now, I've got my own answer to that. I imagine the audience has their own answer, but that's something to think about. But we're taught that we need to obey. We need to obey these systems. We need to obey these authority figures. And this goes into why people stay quiet, because the easier thing to do, and this was told to me by the person I was talking to, the easier thing to do is to follow the standards set by the system, to jump through the hoops that they create for you, to match up with the standards that they want you to match up with, to achieve success that way rather than standing outside it, rather than creating your own standard. Because when you create your own standard, that threatens the standard of the old ways. All right, in the old system, the people who are somehow gaining something from it, whether it be money or esteem, prestige, self-respect, based off of the respect of others in that system, they will do everything to beat down the new system, to keep it from becoming the new standard that people follow, because it threatens them. So that's my own take on why people stay silent. This article by Fran Shure continues. I'm not going to have time to read the whole thing here because I have to play the interview, but you can again read that at ae911truth.org. Read the whole thing and share it with others. See what they think. All right, before I play my interview with Ted Walter and Dennis McMahon, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. I am joined by Dennis McMahon and Ted Walter. Dennis McMahon is a member of the New York and Massachusetts bars. In 2009, he served as the attorney for the 9/11 family members in Burke versus McSweeney as part of the NYC Can petition effort to have the New York City voters decide whether that city should have its own investigation into what really happened on 9/11. Dennis was instrumental in introducing the Building What campaign, which was later renamed Remember Building 7, and in 2011 he helped coordinate part of the Investigate Building 7 conference, which was held in West Hartford, Connecticut. He currently serves as a member of David Ray Griffin's Consensus 9/11 Project and is a member of the writing team at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He's also currently a member of the NYC Can Board of Directors. Dennis, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andy.
And Ted Walter is the founder of the New York City Coalition for Accountability Now. It's an organization he started in 2009 with a group of 9/11 family members to advance the New York City ballot initiative for an independent commission to reinvestigate the 9/11 attacks, just like we just talked about. He has since served as the manager of Remember Building 7, which was a TV ad campaign at exposing New Yorkers to the collapse of the World Trade Center Building 7, and he was the co-campaign manager for the Rethink 9/11 9/11 campaign. He holds a master's degree in public policy from UC Berkeley, and he's a budget analyst for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Now he's heading up the High-Rise Safety Initiative, which we'll be talking about today. Ted, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Glad to be on.
Now, we may have first-time listeners. People have never heard about this stuff at all before, even though I've been talking about it nearly every week since it started. So, Ted, beginning with you, can you briefly remind our audience, what is the High-Rise Safety Initiative, and what are you and your volunteers, what have you been doing since it started?
Absolutely. So the High-Rise Safety Initiative is a ballot measure that would require the City of New York to investigate the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, as well as any future high-rise collapses that occur in New York City. And so we launched this ballot initiative earlier this year. In February, we announced to the public that we were doing it and started raising funds at that time. Since then, from May until the end of July, we gathered over 100,000 signatures from New York City voters. And we submitted the first of two petitions that we have to submit. The first one we submitted on July 3rd. And since then, after a month of submitting that first petition, the city clerk of the City of New York has responded, and as we largely anticipated, has challenged the petition, saying both that we are a little bit short of the signatures required to get the initiative on the ballot, and also that there are, essentially a few aspects of the charter provision that the city is challenging. And so now we are heading into court to essentially go to battle against the city legally and to prove that our petition is legally valid and to have the voters vote on it this November.
Well, what I love about your initiative, and I said it before, is how reasonable it is. Again, big, giant 47-story steel frame high-rise just completely collapses, allegedly. We don't say collapse because it was destroyed because of a fire, they say. We know that's not possible. But we should have a better understanding of why this happened. And there's nothing unreasonable about that request. And just laid out on the paper, on the ballot, for people to see, I can't see how anybody would object to that. I mean, again, you're in a high-rise building, a fire breaks out, you don't want it falling on your head. So it's just, it makes sense, and it's unreasonable for anyone to stand in the way of that. Now, Dennis, we were talking before we began the recording. Can you tell us how the idea to just investigate Building 7 came up?
Sure. During the hearing stage of the 2009 effort, the judge in the case, Judge Lerner, asked the city's lawyer, Stephen Kitzinger, if a narrower petition than the one we were presenting could succeed. A petition limited, for instance, he said, why Building 7 collapsed. And Kitzinger said, that could succeed, that's possible. And Lerner asked him, why? Because it's local, and Kitchen just offered it's local in nature, and it could be tied to building standards. So that exchange, there you have the representative for the City of New York's legal department saying that a petition that encompassed specifically the collapse or destruction of Building 7 could succeed. So that always stuck out in my mind, even more so than Judge Lerner's infamous Building Watt comment. And when Ted was out on the West Coast, New York City Can was somewhat inactive in that time, and I got an email from David Ray Griffin saying, are you guys doing anything? He was a forward, I think, from Aidan Monahan, actually. And I thought about that. I revisited that, and then Ted and I were in contact, and we discussed it, and we brought it to our top election lawyers here in New York City, and we ran it past them, and they felt pretty secure that they could draft a petition that had a good chance of succeeding, and we went ahead and did that over the course of the last year before we got started on the campaign.
So this isn't just something that you guys came up with and said, okay, we'll throw this against the wall and see if it sticks. We'll try this angle. I mean, this was brought up by the judge as something that could pass. This is something you guys conferred with top lawyers
as something that New York City could have and hold a vote on. And so it's again, you've gone through all the proper channels of investigation and research and bringing this to the people of New York City. So it'd be very interesting to see how they try to oppose this when this comes up and this gets argued. Now, I just want to know, and feel free, anybody, because Dennis, you're the one with the law degree, but Ted, you can comment on this too. I don't know much about the intricacies of the government of New York City, and I'm guessing that most of our audience doesn't either. Can one of you explain in more detail what authority does the mayor and the city council have to stand in the way of a ballot initiative like this? You know, once you've gathered the petition signatures, what can they really do other than challenging the signatures?
Sure. So the ballot initiative process under which this is all happening is laid out in municipal home rule law of New York State. It's essentially the law that grants lawmaking powers to the municipalities in New York State. And this particular process basically gives voters the ability to amend their city charter by collecting signatures and submitting a petition. And the first step, essentially, that happens for New York City, the requirement is that you have to gather at least 30,000 signatures or have 30,000 ballot signatures. And the first step in the process after you submit that petition, within 30 days after submitting the petition, the city clerk is supposed to respond and say whether the petition complies with all the requirements of law. And so basically it means, is the petition consistent with local, state, and federal law? Is there anything that's wrong with the petition, or is it all kosher? And essentially it gives the city, in a way, tremendous power. Ultimately, a court decides whether the city is right or not. But the first step is that the city has to say, does this comply or not with the law? And unfortunately, over the last 50 years or so in New York City, every ballot initiative that has been attempted has been challenged by the city. The city's natural reflex in these situations is to just challenge it and not allow the voters to weigh in on important issues. And the only ballot initiative that has made it onto the ballot in the last 30 years or so was a ballot initiative to establish term limits for the mayor and the city council, and this was back in 1993. And so we knew going into this, as we did in 2009, that it's an uphill battle. At the same time, we looked at the ballot initiatives that had been attempted over the last several decades, and there were a lot of lessons to be learned. And we knew that if we worked with good election attorneys and we used the lessons that we learned in 2009, that we would have a very good chance this time around of drafting a petition that would overcome the city's legal challenge and would get on the ballot. So that's essentially how the process works. Just as a quick aside, there's also the city council that can vote on whether or not to put our initiative on the ballot. But if they vote against it or they don't take any action, we can submit a second petition in the first week of September to override their veto. And that's exactly what we intend to do. We have another 33,000 signatures that we've already gathered that we will be submitting to override the city council's lack of action.
So they do have power in the process to stand in the way of the people's will here, then. That does exist.
They have power, yes, but it'll ultimately be determined by a judge whether their reasons for challenging the petition are valid. And we are confident that we can show that essentially their reasons are unfounded and that we will get on the ballot.
Well, what I'd like to clarify for myself and maybe for any other audience members who may be confused by this, the mayor made a comment when he was asked about this by the media, and I'm going to ask you guys about the media pretty soon too, but he made a comment saying, I'm going to block it. Now, to me, it seems the law is the law. I mean, if I'm under 55 miles an hour in the state driving, then I'm within the speed limit. If I break over 55, then I'm breaking the speed limit. All right, it's pretty. The law seems to be kind of black and white, or at least it should be. That's kind of what we're taught it is. So I'm just curious, beyond looking at the petition and trying to find somewhere where maybe certain signatures don't match up, or however they go through that process, assuming that all your ducks are in a row with that, what power do they have to block it? It sounds like there is a process along the way beyond getting it on the ballot about whether or not the city council can include it, that they can basically override the will of the people and not incorporate it. So am I correct in saying that, or am I misunderstanding?
So their power to block it is, A, the city council can try to veto it. We submit the petition. The city council has the choice of whether or not to put it on the ballot. They can vote it down, and then we can override their veto by submitting a second petition. So that's the political part of it, and we have the ammo to overcome that challenge. The more difficult part is to have a charter amendment that is legally valid, and that's really the fight that we're getting into here. The city has challenged the petition and said that certain provisions of it are not legally valid. And so now we have to go to court and prove to a judge that in fact all the provisions of our petition are legally valid, that there's nothing that's wrong with the petition as far as how it's laid out and what it's trying to do. And that's where the city's power to block this stands. But however, it will be ultimately in the hands of a judge and not simply the whim of the city.
I see now. Now, interestingly enough, you're talking about the city council and how they can block it. The mayor is not the city council. The mayor is the executive. He's the mayor. What can the mayor do? I mean, is that just an empty statement by the mayor saying, I'm going to try to block it? You maybe talk about his political power, or what's that mean?
I think he was sort of vaguely referring perhaps to both trying to get the city council sort of lobbying or advocating on his part for the city council to vote it down. He may have also been speaking to his power as the mayor and being in control of the legal department of the city to challenge the legality of the petition, which is ultimately where the mayor has the power. He doesn't have the power to veto it politically. That he can only encourage the city council to do. But it is by his agency that the city's law department has challenged our petition. And so that's essentially how he's trying to block it.
So he has the power basically to use the resources of the city to try to stand in the way of a very reasonable request by the people to investigate why this building fell down when it shouldn't have. Okay. Now, I'm curious by the media's reaction. It seems like once media caught wind of what you guys were doing, that they went out of their way to let everybody know that this is a 9/11 truth petition, that it's not a simple inquiry into why the building came down as it's laid out and as it reasonably should be laid out, because that's basically what it is. But they were trying to put in everybody's minds that there's something more to this. And I think that's what the media is purposely doing that. Obviously, that's just my opinion. But I want to get you guys' reaction to the media reaction to your very simple and common sense initiative from both of you. So we'll start with Dennis.
Well, you have on one end of the spectrum, you have the New York Post, which is like the rag of the city, just saying conspiracy theorists want this and mocking us all the way and not dealing at all with any of the evidence. And then you have on the other side of the spectrum, New York One, where Ted appeared, which is a local cable TV station, and they were relatively fair. I mean, if I was the producer, it would have been better, but they were pretty fair to Ted when he made the appearance there. And so we've run the gamut. I tell you, I am not a believer in the old saying that no publicity is bad publicity. I do not believe that. But here, even though the bad publicity is there, I do think it favors us because in 2009, we didn't get any real mainstream coverage that I can recall. And here you have Cranes, you have New York One, you have the New York Post, and a host of others picking up these stories. So I'm quite pleased with the coverage that we've gotten so far.
Ted, what's your reaction to the media?
I agree with Dennis completely. I think simply by virtue of the amount of coverage that we've gotten, it has been great. And people are, I would say all in all, while people deride us, I think that they do so because they're, in fact, intimidated or somewhat afraid that this could actually be on the ballot. And if this were on the ballot, that would actually, the amount of public dialogue that would follow about the collapse of this building and about 9/11 in general would be tremendous. And so I think it's actually a good sign that there's been all this coverage. And of course, the New York Posts of the world are going to attack us as they have. But in this particular situation, that's good publicity.
Right, and it lets everybody know what's happening with it, and that somebody is trying, that 9/11 Truth is not just a bunch of people talking amongst themselves on the internet, that there actually is a political effort to shine a light on what really happened that day. And again, it's not conspiratorial to ask why this building came down. And what gets me, when I first read that statement of de Blasio saying that he would block it, I showed that to people that I knew, and just people who are not even into 9/11 Truth or really world issues at all, and they told me, hey, that really helps your cause because that looks crazy. That looks like they got something to hide. So I think this absolutely helps, and the mayor's statement, as bad as it is that you have to fight the entire governmental structure of the city to try to get a reasonable thing like this simple investigation into Building 7, as bad as that is, the fact that they're reacting the way they are helps the cause and really opens a lot of eyes. Now, getting back to the legal process, I'm curious, what qualifies a person to be a bona fide, acceptable petition signer? What are they looking for? What are they seeing in your petition or allegedly seeing in your petition to say that this person is no good? We're going to throw this name out.
I think in short, he has to be a registered voter. That's about the short and sweet of it.
Yep,
registered voter should be okay.
Yeah, a registered voter as of the last general election, so as of last November.
How do they living in New York City?
And I mean, I'm just curious, how do they fact check this thing? Do they call the people? I mean, do you know how the process works on their end of what they're doing to say this guy's no good?
I was curious about that. They don't really say specifically how they determined it. I got to say, my initial reaction is like they just threw out a number and said this is no good. I don't know what they did to investigate, the validity of the signatures. I believe that is part of the issue in our order to show cause, isn't it, Ted?
Yes, it is. So the city has probably used if they didn't just pick a number out of thin air, if they used any criteria at all and actually made a process out of it, they probably used the most stringent criteria and actually, we believe, unlawful criteria that they could in order to challenge as many signatures as possible. So the biggest way that they probably challenged a bunch of, several thousand signatures that we will find are actually valid is by looking up somebody's name, and if they can't find that there's a name that matches up with the address that the petition signer has given, they'll just cross out that signature. And in fact, that's not the true test of whether somebody's a registered voter. If you don't see the person's name and address matching up, you have to look at essentially the voter registration card of each signer and see if the signature matches. And that's the true test for establishing whether the person is really a registered voter. And so in 2009, we found out of about 25,000 signatures that the city challenged, 7,000 signatures that should not have been challenged. And we expect to find a similar number this time and be well over the 30,000 signature requisite that we need to be.
Well, I'm curious about this now because, again, to check all of these names and say this amount of people are no good, what was the time frame in which they did this? Like, at what point did you get everything submitted to them and then they came back and said, well, no, we were throwing out these names? How long did they have to establish that?
They have 30 days by statute, so that's the time period. And they do actually have a very large staff of people at the Board of Elections who, I don't know what they do most of the year, but when it's petition season, when candidates are trying to get on the ballot, or in our situation, they have a whole army of people that go through and check the signatures. But unfortunately, the criteria that they use are actually unlawful, and it's really unfair to voters because it creates a tremendous amount of work for us. And they basically, like, just presumptively, we can't find your address in there, you're done, your voice doesn't matter, that your signature is not valid. And really there's no benefit of the doubt given to voters. It's their goal is to stop us from getting on the ballot.
Where are they looking for their address? For instance, like when I came back from Peace Corps, I had nowhere to go. I only had like $2,000 to my name because I hadn't been working in America for a year and a half. We'd come home after we evacuated the country. So I was living with my mom, but I was a registered voter, but you wouldn't have seen my name on any property or anything like that because I was registered at my mom's house. And so I imagine that there's lots of people in New York City. It's a pretty big place who are living somewhere with somebody else who their name may not appear in the phone book or in any other registry other than that voter registration card. So where are they looking up addresses from? I mean, you may not know, but I'm curious if you do.
Oh, no, it's a database. It's essentially like if you register to vote, your name and your address will be in this database. And even there will be like a scanned copy of the original voter registration form that you filled out. And so that's it. So like if you put in Andrew Steele, you'll find like 3 or 4 Andrew Steeles in the system, and hopefully one of those addresses will match the address that you gave on the petition. If it doesn't, the city will cross out your signature, even though that's not the lawful way to do it.
Right. Or you may have moved in the interim.
Okay, so essentially that's not a reason, and you're arguing that's not a reason to cross their name off of the petition list.
Yeah, it's not, and that's unambiguous legally. We will, if the city is not ordered to go back and redo its count of the signatures to allow for those signatures to be valid, we will go in and find probably up to 10,000 signatures that were wrongly challenged because the address did not match the address given on the petition, or in the voter database.
I see. How much communication have you guys had with the city throughout this process? Has it just been kind of, oh, here's our signatures, and now we got this letter from them saying this, and we're challenging it, or has there been any kind of dialogue between the players in this?
There really hasn't been much. There hasn't needed to be. I think we informed the city clerk a few days before we submitted the petition that we were about to submit a very large petition. And that's been about it. Since then, the city clerk has transmitted their letter to us, and it's been minimal.
Now, I want to get you guys both your take on a statement that was made. This is from Melissa Mark Viverito, and she said this. This was quoted in many news sources. Instead of wasting New Yorkers' time and hard-earned taxpayer dollars humoring conspiracy theorists with wild fantasies, the City Council will continue to focus on passing sound legislation. This is a reaction to the Highway Safety Initiative and the blocking of it. From each of you, I want to hear, we'll start with Dennis, what are your reactions to that statement like that?
Well, it just shows how, at best, she's uneducated. She has obviously not looked at the evidence. I mean, she sounds like the New York Post, just bad-mouthing people for a position that they stand for without really knowing anything about the evidence. Fire, especially fire that have already burned out, could not cause the collapse of Building 7. How can you not deal with that issue? And it just call people names, conspiracy theorists, they throw out that word, and it just tries to get everybody to not look at the evidence, just dismiss these people. They want us dismissed because whoever looks at the evidence with any kind of an open mind realizes that Building 7 came down in a controlled demolition. Once you establish that, and you know that the CIA was in that building, the SEC, and you had Giuliani's office in that building, it becomes very, very suspicious about what was really going on, and people just don't want to look at that. So whether they're hiding from themselves or hiding from the truth, I don't really know, but a statement like that is at best an uneducated statement.
Ted, what's your reaction?
I mean, I agree with Dennis completely. Again, I think he said it best when he said that she sounded like the New York Post. I mean, the fact that a quote-unquote progressive political leader like her, who's the Speaker of the City Council, is reduced to sounding like the New York Post is shameful on her part, and shows that at best she's uninformed. And the tendency to throw these labels around like conspiracy theorists and wild fantasies and stuff. It's mind-boggling to hear that coming from an elected official like her. And there's not much more you can say except that hopefully her mind will be changed massively over the coming months, because this gets on the ballot and New Yorkers at large realize that this is something important that needs to be supported.
What's really messed up to me is how everybody in the system and the establishment, anyone with any kind of power, seems to parrot one another. It's almost like there's a test somewhere where you have to give the right answer to every circumstance that could come up. And one of the things that comes up if you bring up stuff about 9/11 is to throw out that word conspiracy theorist. Like, you just say that word and it just stops all conversation. People are supposed to be peer pressured into shutting up because you get called a name, and they think this works, and it's not working anymore. I mean, we saw this when the person, Mr. Kurt Eichenwald, came on C-SPAN the day after Richard Gage was on there, and nobody was paying attention to him, essentially. Everybody called and disagreed with him. One guy called in and essentially just thanked C-SPAN for having Richard on and didn't even say anything to the guest. Because that's all this guy's argument was, is just call people conspiracy theorists and leave it at that. Couldn't address any of the points that were raised in any of the issues that he brought up and attacked, including 9/11 truth. And so these arguments are hollow. And I mean, I'm sure Dennis can understand that. In terms of law school, you learn how to debate, and these kind of attacks don't really hold up. They wouldn't hold up in a court case. I mean, essentially, and we don't get into complicity, and I don't want anyone to mistake me for trying to do that right now, or with these two guys, and we're talking about the Highway Safety Initiative, but I'm just bringing up the point that if the official story were on trial, or if Osama bin Laden were on trial, and we were defending him, all you have to do is raise a reasonable doubt that he was involved, and the man would go free. Well, we've raised reasonable doubt. Okay, so the government story does not make any sense. And we've lost sight of that. We've lost sight of logical thinking in this country, and it's really scary when really all our elected officials, most of them, can really just act as cheerleaders in this big nationalistic pep rally, repeating the same chants and insults, but not really addressing any of the nuts and bolts of what the people are waking up to. And they've lost so much touch that they've lost the people. They're not even in charge anymore. It's like that song I brought up on the show weeks ago. These men of power are losing control by the hour. And that's not a good situation for the country, folks. I mean, it's good for coming to some kind of truth and to an awakening, but for the overall state of affairs, that's not good. It's not good for stability, and I hope we don't see any drastic consequences from that. Now, if you guys win in this court, and we kind of talked about this earlier, but just to reiterate and elaborate on it, if you guys win in this challenge right now, what other obstacles could the city of New York throw in your way, and beyond what is in their legal capacity? What other kind of unforeseen things have you possibly wargamed or thought of? What other ways could they try to stand in your way that might be undercutting the legal process or working around it? What do you anticipate?
So we are very concerned about the possibility of some kind of election of fraud occurring during the election. and we will have to be very vigilant and do a lot of research and employ multiple strategies to make sure that the votes are tallied properly. Prior to that, I think there's a possibility that somebody could try to mount sort of an organized challenge to the referendum. Again, kind of questions like, well, who would really say no to this? And so I think it would have to be pretty cleverly put together how and who exactly would be opposing us and mounting the campaign against us. But essentially, it would avoid all the facts and just kind of point the conspiracy theorist finger at us and try to make the voters think that this whole thing is crazy without even really looking at it. And so on our side, we have to do everything we can, raise as much funds as we can. We're hoping, if we get on the ballot, to be able to raise several millions of dollars to properly educate the voters about this initiative, about the need for a new investigation into Building 7's collapse, as well as the need to investigate any future high-rise collapses. And we think that the one sort of scenario that people are concerned about, what if the city doesn't conduct an honest investigation? We feel like if we win this, if we can convince the voters to vote in favor of this, that there will be enough public pressure and public awareness to ensure that the city has to conduct a proper investigation. But it's definitely getting to that point. There will be other obstacles besides the legal obstacles that we're currently facing.
How does the voting work in New York City? Do you do it with the digital scanners? Do they do it with the voting booths? How does that work? Do you know?
I actually moved back to the city this year, so I haven't participated in a general election since moving back in January. But I believe that in the last 4 years, they've instituted electronic voting. So I think it's more digitized and has a screen. But Dennis, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I tell you the truth. I haven't voted since I got tricked into voting for Obama the first time around, but it was an electronic version. Back in 2009 when we were trying to get the first petition on the ballot, that was the last year of the old-fashioned voting machines, which you could monitor readily. The problem with monitoring the computerized voting, I've spoken to an election expert, and I said, how can we guarantee that the electronic count is accurate? And she said, you can't. So, but I would hope if we get on the ballot, I would hope that the election system is not rigged. I don't have any evidence that it is rigged. So we hope that they don't monkey with that. And then we'd also do polls of people coming out of the booths. How did you vote? I mean, those are usually very reliable polls. How did you vote on this issue? And usually if the official result varies from that, as I think it did in a number of instances in the George Bush elections, then you know pretty well that you have a rigged voting system.
Well, and I don't understand why they even moved away from the voting booths. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry and easy to check, just like you said. And the reason I bring it up because we talked about potential challenges and what could come up, and the fact that it is all electronic should make people pause, especially since you have the mayor saying he's vowing to block it when he can't really do anything except use his political pressure and what other non-political pressure that he may have access to stop something like this from happening. So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves as the movement and as supporters of the High-Rise Safety Initiative. I've often compared 9/11 Truth to like one of those old WWF matches where the good guy is about to win and then he's got like three bad guys jumping in the ring on him while the referee's knocked out and he has to like fight them. It's like the rules don't apply to us. We have to like fight extra battles in order to reach for the belt here. And so, this is just the way it is, folks, and this is the way it's been for people trying to institute changes since the beginning of civilization. So we got to think in terms of what if and war game every possible scenario. Now, guys, if you lose this legal challenge, even though your case sounds really solid, we know how the system works. If you lose, what are the next steps you might take?
That's a good question, Andy. I think we haven't decided. We're working to some degree under the assumption that we're going to win, and I think we really have to see if we don't, what the environment looks like down the road, and what people would be ready and willing to support. But we're definitely. I have no plans to go away if this fails.
Our audience wants to know how they can help. Everybody's excited about this initiative. It's using the process, the political process, to get a real investigation, and folks want to do what they can. So for people in New York City, I'm going to ask this both of you if you want to both chime in, but for one category for people in New York City, and then another category for people in the rest of the country, or the world for that matter. How can our audience help you guys out during this critical time in this initiative?
Well, we need help from people that live in New York City. We really need your help reviewing the signatures, and it's probably going to start next Monday, a week from now. We are going to be, we need. In 2009, we had like 20 or 30 volunteers who came every day and helped us go through the signatures to rescue all these signatures that the city was wrongly challenging. And so you don't have to be available every day. If you have 1 day a week, or if you have, 4 hours each day, whatever works for you, we really need your help. We need to have at least, 20 to 30 volunteers at the Board of Elections with us every day helping us out. If you're further away, or for both groups, we are also still raising funds for our legal defense. We have a generous donor who's pledged a $15,000 matching grant to match all donations that come in over the next couple of weeks, because we have to raise double that. We have to raise $30,000, and so we're already a third of the way there. We've raised over $4,000. We essentially need to raise another $10,000 in small donations, which this generous donor is going to match, and then we will have enough funds to defend our petition in court. And a lot of people have said, why don't you find somebody to do a pro bono or whatnot? Well, we're working with basically the best election lawyer in New York City, because this area of the law is very specialized. And so we really need this guy on our side. He gives us the best chance of success. And if you can just manage a $10 donation, it will be used very well to give us the best chance of getting on the ballot.
Absolutely, folks. And how can they do this? How can they donate or volunteer?
Yeah, so just go to the website, highrisesafetynyc.org. Again, that's highrisesafetynyc.org. That's all one word, no dashes. You can contact us. There's a contact page, and then you can make the donation on our donation page through PayPal or by mailing us a check.
Right, folks, and this is something you want to do, especially if you're out in New York City. Look, I've worked on campaigns, I've done election campaigns, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, you have fun hanging out with people, and you do the work, but you're part of something big, and there's a lot of excitement in that. And it's not like you're having to start from scratch. You're part of a group. The foundation's already been laid. You just need to show up and pick up some of the load here. So absolutely, volunteer if you have time. Do whatever you can for this movement. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we want people doing. This is the kind of stuff we dreamed of people doing years ago. These things are happening now. Big stuff is happening, but you have to participate. You have to use that people power to push it over. I saw a news article about somebody got trapped between I think it was like a subway train somewhere, and the people all got together and shoved the subway train back so he could get out. Well, that's what we're doing as a movement right now, and all hands on deck. Everybody's hands, even with just a little bit of pressure, can move gigantic vehicles and save lives, because again, the more we expose this, the less chance that we have of another kind of 9/11 style event, because the people, whoever was responsible for putting explosives in those buildings, is watching, and they are more nervous now. You better believe that. Now, I want to hear from both of you guys on this. What are you afraid happens if we don't expose this, if we don't get a real investigation of Building 7, if the city is allowed to just stand in the way of democracy, call people conspiracy theorists, and pack up and essentially just let the story of 9/11 go into the history books unchallenged and let the official story, the outrageous official story, just stand? What are you guys afraid happens to people, to America, to the world? We'll start with Dennis.
Well, we see what's going on since the tragic events of 9/11. I mean, it's not overly dramatic to say the world has completely changed. We've become, we were always a bit in this country, somewhat of imperialists, and lately we've got wars all over the Middle East, killing women and children every day, innocent women and children every day, as our allies also do in the Middle East. And it's just a terrible situation, and it's all based on this foundation of 9/11 being carried out allegedly by 18 guys with box cutters, you know, and somehow outsmarting the most sophisticated military industrial defense system ever created on the planet Earth. It's just absurd, and the absurdity continues, and it's just a mad, mad world. So unless we undo the basis for all these insane war actions, it's just going to go on and on and on and on. I don't know where it's headed. I mean, the way they talk now, they're picking fights with Russia, and you know, it looks like World War III could actually happen. You know, so I would like to see the basis for all this crazy meddling and interference in other nations end, and we could do that if we could take out the linchpin for all that, which is 9/11.
Ted, same question. What are you afraid happens to the world, to the country, to people individually if we don't expose what really happened to those buildings in New York on 9/11?
Well, again, I agree completely with Dennis. I think he said it very well. I don't know, to put it very shortly, you know, our entire foreign policy and much of our domestic policy is based on a false understanding of what happened on 9/11. And in particular, our political culture has really just deteriorated and mutated since 9/11. And I want to see us move in a completely different direction politically. I want people to believe in their political system again. I want to see a true participatory democracy. I want to see an end to this just insane political culture. And I think that starts with exposing what really happened on 9/11. And if we don't, we continue down the same road, and we eventually, you know, we don't live in a democracy anymore.
Right, and folks, these guys right here, the ones you're listening to right now, are the wisest of the wise here, because they know that in order to expose this, you have to use the political process. This is the kind of stuff that we're taught to do when we're growing up, but I feel like it's giving us lip service when the TV tells you, you know, rock the vote, vote for a candidate, vote for some guy who's going to go into office and fix all your problems. That's essentially what they're telling you. So they tell you to use the process, but don't use it for things like this. Well, that's a bunch of bunk. You need to listen to the guys were the guests on the show today, because they've got it figured out, okay? It doesn't come down to a slugfest with the government like some people get all hepped up and excited about. It comes down to using the institutions and the establishment that we have, the governmental processes that we have to reclaim our government in a peaceful way. They're doing it, and you need to support them, because this is the real fight for freedom in the 21st century. 9/11 truth, the freedom to be able to say that 2 + 2 = 4, that it does not equal 5, and that physics and common sense do rule the day, okay? That you can trust your eyes, and you can trust just basic universal laws that don't go out the window just because politics is attached to a certain event. So you need to go to the high-rise safety page. You need to volunteer, donate, do whatever you can, or spread the word, spread this show, tell everybody what is going on in New York right now and how the city is trying to stand in the way of democracy. Ted Walter, Dennis McMahon, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having us.
Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download the show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.